Greetings and warm welcome, dear audience. Yeah, welcome to our another professional masterclass today. Sorry, last week we had technical issues, so we are not able to conduct our training. So today we are back again with another interesting session as usual, our honorable guest is Ambassador Professor Rania Lampu from Greece. And today her topic will be on, today is her lecture number 4, Literature Review Techniques. So for this, I would like to welcome Professor Rania Lampu to start the session. Welcome, Dr. Rania.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Esther. Thank you. Good evening, good afternoon. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all, me too, today's session. I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Elgin Higher Education for giving me the opportunity to conduct this series of research sessions. And of course, I would like to thank you, Dr. Estera, for your kind invitations always. So before starting sharing presentation, I want to say that today we'll focus on the review of related literature. It's a crucial part of any research endeavor. So whether you are a seasoned researcher or you're just starting your journey, this review of related literature lays the foundation for meaningful and credible academic work. So this session today aims to guide you through the process of identifying reliable sources, how to synthesize information, how to present related literature in a coherent and scholarly manner. And most importantly, it reminds us that we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, and that our work is part of a larger ongoing conversation. So once again, welcome. And now we'll start sharing my presentation. I think now it's visible. Agostera, can you see also the change of slide?
Yeah. Okay, it's okay. It's doing well. Yes.
So, we know that the literature review has been called as the Cinderella of research. Why? Because it is often seen as the poor relation to primary research or as the dull but necessary prelude to a research report or proposal. However, a good review can extract actually new ideas from others' work by synthesizing and summarizing previous sources. New theories can be built from the evidence discussed, and new directions for future research can be suggested. A literature review can also facilitate the use of best available evidence in daily practice by supplying answers to clinical questions. And we're going to see literature reviews are also an ideal first step into the world of publishing. And all the investigator needs is an initial research question, access to a literature database, and some basic evaluation and writing skills. So what is literature review? It's actually a critical summary of all the published work on a particular topic. Most research papers include a section on literature review as part of the introduction. However, a literature review can also be published as a standalone article. And while the basics would remain the same for any kind of literature review, whether it's an independent piece of writing or a part of a larger article, this session today will focus more on literature review as an article type. So literature reviews, along with systematic reviews and meta-analysis, come under the broad category of review articles. A review article is an overview or a critical assessment of existing literature in a specific field. And this has to do with how we analyze specific issues or how we identify trends, how we point out research gap in existing literature. We could say that review articles are the gold mines, virtual gold mines of information, as readers are able to form an idea about the current state of understanding on the topic and decide whether to read each article individually. Such articles are extremely useful for both new researchers and busy scientists in the field to keep abreast of developments in the field, to find gaps in research, identifying new research areas. What is, we could say that the definition is that a literature review identifies, evaluates, and synthesizes the relevant literature within a particular field of research. And definitely, it illuminates how knowledge has evolved within the field. It tries to highlight what has already been said, what is generally accepted, what is emerging, what is the current state of thinking of the topic. And in addition, within research-based texts, such as doctoral thesis, for example, literature review identifies a research gap of what we call unexplored or under-researched areas and articulates how a particular research project addresses this gap. The whole literature has to do with a compilation, with a collection of published information, a particular area of research, so that could be books or general articles of academic value. However, your literature review does not need to be inclusive of every article or book that has been written on your topic, because this would be very too vague or too broad. On the other hand, it should include the key sources related to the main trends and gaps in your research area. If we talk about review, to review the literature means what? Means to be able to identify what has been, for example, accepted or discredited or established in your field. What are the areas of debate, of controversy or conflict among different schools of thought? What are the problems or issues that remain still unsolved? What are the emerging trends in new approaches, and how your research will extend, how will build upon previous and prior research? So a review of literature presents much more than a summary of relevant sources. The act of reviewing involves evaluating individual sources as well as synthesizing these sources in order to gain a broad view of the field. So at this field level, a literature review discusses common and emerging approaches, notable patterns and trends, area of conflicts and information and controversies, gaps with relevant literature. When you clearly observe these things, you will be able to situate your own research and contribute to ongoing debates within the field. And in other words, when reviewing a literature, not only do you need to able to compare, to don't only engage with a body of language or literature, but you also need to be able to contrast, to synthesize, to compare, and at the same time make arguments that indicates your readiness to contribute to the literature itself. So now, the function of literature review, this literature review functions as as a tool to provide a background to a research work by summarizing the previously published work, to classify the research into different categories and show how the research in a particular area has changed by indicating historical background, or if you explain the research developments in your field, to clarify your areas of controversy and agreement between experts, to evaluate the previous research and identify the gaps, to help justify your research by indicating how this is different from other works in the same area. So the main characteristics of this is that a good review should be first comprehensive. Evidence should be gathered from all relevant sources. It should be fully referenced, allowing others to follow the path of the author to the paper's conclusion. Selective means using appropriate search strategies to find the key evidence. Relevant means focusing on pertinent data, and balanced. Balanced means try to always to find the balance between different ideas and opinions. And critical, of course, and analytical. Analytical means develop new ideas and understandings from the evidence. So a literature review can provide a concise, we could say, explanation, a concise examination, a discussion of evidence in a particular area. When we look for a quick overview of a topic, published review articles can cover a wide range of subject matter at various levels of completeness and comprehensiveness based on analysis of literature that may include research findings. So above all, the author should provide readers with a clear picture of the subject and its associated range of perspectives and opposing views, and avoid presenting dry or boring lists of poorly debated facts randomly selected and referenced. So sometimes it's a standalone publication. It is based on previously published works. It does not include new data or experiments, and does not include unpublished material in any form. As I mentioned before, a literature review should not include every single source that you have read. It's important to be selective about the sources if you choose to address. You need to ensure that the sources you analyze are directly relevant to your research question. It's important also that you think critically about the credibility and reliability of sources. And here we have some differences that you need to know, the difference between annotated bibliographies and literature reviews. They have some similarities, actually. As with a literature review, an annotated bibliography is an account of the research that has been carried out in research in a given area. However, an annotated bibliography is usually just a list of relevant sources with a brief summary. And sometimes an annotated bibliography contains an assessment of the sources, but there is no effort to synthesize the various sources in a coherent conclusion which reflects the author's opinion, as it happens in a literature review. So here you can see some differences here. Literature review, it's about multiple text analyzed. In annotated bibliography, we have usually single text analyzed. And what we mentioned before about the no attempt to synthesize various sources. Analysis synthesis may appear to be two opposing methods, but when we talk about literature review, analysis involves what we systematically break down the relevant literature into its constituent parts. On the other hand, synthesis is the act of making connections between those parts identified in the analysis. Systematic review, some types of literature reviews, there are several commonly used formats for literature reviews. Systematic review has to do usually with clinical research. It's a high-level overview of primary research on a particular research question that tries systematically to identify, select, evaluate, and synthesize all high-quality research evidence which is relevant to the question. And the main characteristic of a systematic review is that it actually uses a transparent and systematic process to define a research question. Whether we talk about qualitative or quantitative research. So in systematic review, we ask a question when we answer it by summarizing evidence that meets what we call pre-specified criteria. So the process here starts with a research question and a protocol or research plan. There is usually a review team which searches for studies to answer the question, and they use a highly sensitive research strategy. So here usually the steps of a systematic review, we identify the research question, we define inclusion or exclusion criteria, the search for studies, we select the studies, we extract data, we assess the quality, finally we synthesize and we present results. So what are the key attributes? As I said before, systematic reviews follow pre-specified methods, which are explicit and replicable. The review team usually assesses the quality of the evidence and tries, of course, to minimize the biases, and the results conclusions are based on the evidence. On the other hand now, I forgot to mention here that systematic reviews usually are related to what we call meta-analysis, which is an attempt to quantitatively condense the results from several papers into a single statistic. So creating a systematic review obviously allows for increased power and precision in estimating effects and risks, and in addition, the systematic review is an invaluable practice tool. Larger quantities of information can be evaluated and synthesized into a shorter document, and this allows, for example, clinicians to keep abreast of new developments without having to drag down and read several long reports. Organizations or policymakers can use systematic reviews to help formulate guidelines or to promote the use of best evidence in practice. The Cochrane, I don't know if it's here, the Cochrane collaboration is perhaps one of the best known proponents of systematic reviews designed to answer clinical questions about the effectiveness of treatments. For example, the Cochrane review on interventions for relieving the pain, discomfort of screening, for example, mammography, examined 7 randomized controlled trials involving 1,000 women. This is an example of this. And what is the difference now between systematic and literature review? The reviews methods, we said about how systematic review has transparent, reproducible, and defined methods before the search gets underway. So it's important because it helps to minimize the bias. Literature reviews don't usually apply the same rigor in their methods. That's because, unlike systematic reviews, they don't aim to produce an answer to clinical questions. This is the main difference. Literature reviews can provide context or background information for a new piece of research. They can also stand alone as a general guide to what is already known about a particular topic. And usually they provide an overview of what is known. So before they evaluate the material rather than simply restate it, but the methods used to do this are not usually pre-specified as before, and they are not described in detail as in the review. The search might be comprehensive, but it does not aim to be exhaustive. This is very important. Literature reviews are also referred to as narrative reviews. They use a topical approach, thematical approach, and often take a form of a discussion. Precision here, applicability is not our focus. On the other hand, here the author seeks to demonstrate the understanding and perhaps also present the work in the context of what has come before. And the results or conclusion of a literature review is likely to be presented using words rather than statistical methods. And of course, the conclusions might be influenced by the author's own views. Now, literature review is used to set the scene from a primary research topics, therefore can be fairly concise. This preliminary evaluation can help to convince the reader that the researcher has examined the previous published work on the topic and that the new research that they have conducted is important. And here the argument moves from a broad general appraisal to a more specific examination. Well, we talk about a secondary data analysis project, the research project that should be conducted with appropriate rigor. The secondary data review can be undertaken whether there is a little things known about a subject or if whether there is a wealth of information available. The approach is here to organize and analyze the data, which is more, we could say, qualitative in nature. The material is often organized by theme. Now, we have other approaches. We have a selective approach when a single or limited number of resources are reviewed, a comprehensive approach which requires the review of numerous books and articles which can be presented as a substantial chapter in the research, or it can be published as a scholar review article. We have the chronological or thematic approach. The chronological approach, obviously, this structure is generally used when the focus is to show how ideas or methodology have progressed over time. And usually the sources here are grouped together and discussed in order of their publication date and on the specific topic. And also thematic in this model, we try to organize and discuss existing literature based on theoretical concepts or things that we think that it's important in order to understand the topic. This approach is usually considered as stronger than the chronological model because it's more than summarizing its study. It tries to analyze existing knowledge of the topic with regard to certain important topics. And at the same time, they provide us with a sense of direction towards new perspectives. So now, what is the process of conducting literature review? Remember something, that conducting a literature review is an ongoing, non-linear, at the same time, iterative process. So I could say here, Ollere said that the literature review will inform your question, the theory, and your question theory methods will help set the parameters of your literature. This is a cyclical process. And literature review written in the early stages of research is likely to change, of course. This means iterative. If you are in the early stages of research, your literature review, it is likely to change because you need to review and revise it from time to time and ensure that it's up to date. So you will probably find yourself engaging with the literature in different ways at different stages of your research. And remember that it's usually one of the first tasks that graduate research students undertake and one of the last to be completed. So usually which of the stages involve path remain step to locate relevant literature, to review and write about the literature. And of course, after selecting a topic to investigate, you will begin to locate and read the sources. Then you need to analyze, evaluate and synthesize the text before organizing them into a logical structure that you will use to write the literature review. So it is a cyclical iterative process because you will return finally there to find and read more sources and incorporate them into your synthesis. So usually, how is literature review structured? Usually it has these components. All literature reviews will definitely have an introduction that sets some context by providing information about the field of study, the relevance of a chosen topic within the field, and the focus, which will be the focus of the literature review. Methods. Most literature reviews have a section that describes the criteria used to select the sources or the way in which information has been presented. And this makes it easier for the readers, of course, to understand your approach. How your body paragraphs are structured will depend on the organization model that you have chosen to follow in your literature review. Therefore, a chronological model would probably have different paragraphs for different time periods, while a thematic model will have subtopics based on different themes. Enter the section discussion conclusion. This section summarizes the main contributions of significant studies and discusses the questions that the review has raised about the topic and field. This is also the section where you clearly mention the gaps in research that the review has sparked and the possible suggestions for future research. The reference list is always a very important part of the literature review, as your article is based entirely on primary sources, and the reference list should be detailed, page numbers and section details should be provided whether necessary. So once you are sure of which model to use in your literature review, it should not be difficult to come up with the structure for your review. So usually we want to discuss a lot today about techniques, about the steps. So of course, all these steps we're going to explore, although these steps will be presented in a fairly linear way. Again, I'm repeating that the completion of the review often follows a circuitous path, a non-linear model. The search may be needed to be revisited many times, several times during topic selection. And the search is often revisited as the review develops and new areas of relevance are identified. So the most important preliminary decision from potential authors is defining why they are performing literature review, because this will influence the approach taken. Is the end result to be a publishable research paper? It's a part of a report. It's an attempt to establish standards and guidelines for practice. It's a prelude to a thesis, a dissertation, or it's a personal undertaking to solve a pressing practice question. Is there a choice in the topic, or is the area of interest already circumscribed? So these questions are very important. So the first step is this. So decide why you are performing a literature review. the purpose, and the second step is to define the focus. Often the difficulty, the difficulty is not the topic selection. The difficulty is how to narrow the focus of the review down to a manageable size. For example, the topic of tiredness in people with cancer would yield a vast quantity of information, whereas examining the use of exercise as an intervention to relieve tiredness symptoms in radiation therapy patients is something that would reduce the field considerably. This is the difference. The question, the search strategy, and criteria for excluding studies from the review are decided before conducting the literature search and should all be explicitly defined in what we call method section of our final article. Keywords are the words used to find relevant and useful material during the search. Remember that these keywords chosen for the search are important because they are considered as the cornerstone of an effective search. So before starting, it's important to examine all possible words that might relate to the topic. That could include synonyms or alternate terms, etc. Searches can be restricted then by other factors such as the language of the publication or full text, review papers only, the year of publication, and so on. And it is also worth exploring the online support options of the database that you are using because many databases contain information on the useful search features available or even offer online tutorials. Most databases use a so-called control vocabulary to establish common search terms or keywords, and this ensures a consistent way of retrieving information that may use different terminology for the same concept. Now, spending time planning the search strategy is important because a well-conducted search will identify the relevant articles and texts and ultimately yield a higher quality work. However, there is a plethora of information readily available on conducting effective literature searches. One valuable source of information is, of course, online. I mentioned before, that could be your local medical librarian, information specialist who may offer tutorials on searching medical databases or personalized assistance related to searches. So the author should always keep track of the search strategy in order to ensure that the procedure is rigorous, is explicit, and comprehensive. This strategy can be communicated in the method section of the published article. So this allows readers to follow the author's course of action. The authors must decide on the discipline that best covers the area of interest. Most literature searches today are electronic because many, for example, health centers or hospital libraries have evolved from repositories of journals and text into information centers staffed by expert librarians and information specialists. However, of course, books can still provide useful information in certain topic areas, but remember that some texts can become rapidly outdated and general articles may contain more recent information. The internet is a source of information that can be accessed, but you need to be very careful and cross-check the information. Here I want to mention what we call the grey literature. The grey literature is defined as any material that is not commercially published and therefore not searchable using electronic databases. Grey literature can include conference proceedings, for example, dissertations, theses, government information, committee reports. The importance of accessing this kind of information will vary according to the type of literature review being written. It has been suggested that this type of sources are required, for example, for the master level work and beyond. However, grey literature may be an important source of information for the emergent disciplines of the medical radiation sciences, for example, and in other fields. So how is grey literature be used? It can be used in a wide variety of ways. Most offer data and results, which can actually be serve as a complement to our original research. many other detailed policies or procedures which can be used to improve the existing methods, and examples of great literature, what I mentioned before, about the conference proceedings, the patents, regulatory data, the policies, dissertations, etc. Mention here some examples. The advantages that could be that usually it's about generally reliable data, although on the other hand, there is a lack of comprehensive database. It's usually free, but there is a lack of indexing. There is in-depth information, but it could be all publicly or privately. It's about the timely distribution of information, so no standardized content quality. It may not be peer-reviewed, so it's a big default, and it may be sometimes be copyrighted or restricted. So when you review the literature, it is best to concentrate on primary evidence rather than secondary evidence when it's possible. Because primary evidence is this original research, such as clinical trials or studies or statistical reports. On the other hand, secondary evidence includes articles in which the author reports on original research or data, including mainly primary evidence, ensures that the reader can interpret the original evidence for himself or for himself and eliminates potential bias or inaccuracies from second-hand reports of other people's work. Literature is generally categorized according to the perceived strength of the evidence it contains. Remember this. The review should discuss the strengths and weaknesses of the article's reviews. There are many standard methods available for systematizing this process, mainly based on quantitative research evidence. When we talk about to review, this is about how we organize papers around, and we relate these papers directly to our thesis or research question, how we synthesize the results into a summary of what is not known, how we identify areas of debate, how we formulate questions, and other questions to consider when we read the gathered material is, for example, does this relate to the question posed by the literature review? Is the problem or issue and its significance clearly defined? Could the problem have been better addressed from another perspective? What is the research orientation? Qualitative, quantitative, mixed method? Has the author fairly evaluated the literature, including literature taking a position she or he does not agree with? Does the author appeal to emotion or rhetoric? Does there seem to be an objective basis to the reasoning? Does the material add to the understanding of the field? Is it useful for practice? In a qualitative study, how transparent are the author's methods and approaches? Is there an attempt to show the trustworthiness of the results? In a quantitative research study, how good are the components of the study design? So, these kind of questions. And now, when you write the final article, I mentioned before about the introduction. I will say again that the article should begin with introduction. So this will provide the framework for the reader by providing a brief summary of your area of interest, the relevance to the reader, and the paper's intent. The method section, I repeat again, will describe the search strategy, including the database used and the other sources of information explored. It will also include the keywords used, as well as the inclusion and exclusion criteria and explanation of why these were selected. In the discussion section or body of the article, it is easier to break the main section up into thematic areas and treat each area as a mini review. So this section can also be organized chronologically depending on the focus of the review, and each section should be comprehensive as possible. The review should be balanced and acknowledge controversies and answer questions, issues of bias, and differing opinions. If there is evidence, it should be emphasized and rated for its quality. The important information from the article sources should be recapitulated, but also synthesized by rephrasing the significance of the work and related it back to the question posed by the literature review. If we talk about tables and figures, of course, can highlight key points in the text And the summary table of the references being discussed is often helpful. And the conclusion, which should also answer how and if this article will change practice or what will add to the discussion of the subject. What should the reader take away from our review? Is there any theoretical framework that can be constructed from the literature that could contribute to practice? Are there gaps in knowledge that can be answered by further research? And the author will refer back to the literature and bring pertinent points to the fore. Key issues from the review will be synthesized and reflected on. It is often useful to look at examples of literature reviews that have been published already in your area of research or a target journal. So these are a few general points to bear in mind when you craft the final article. It's important that very important, you need to keep your own voice throughout the process. Therefore, for example, quotations from other authors should be used sparingly. Generally, several drafts will be needed, of course, before the article is finished. The peer review process after submission to a journal will undoubtedly produce several areas for revision, but hopefully this can be minimized with wise consideration. Usually, you will have a specific journal in mind for submission. Almost all journals have online style guides for authors, so it is well worth consulting this before writing up the review, because the article may be returned if it does not follow the journal's format. So often the guidelines are very detailed and may assist the writing process by providing the frameworks for the emerging style. So first, you need to select your topic for your review. Then you consider your specific area of study. Think what interests you and what interests other researchers to your field. So you can talk to your professor, you can brainstorm, you can read lecture notes, recent issues of periodicals in the field. So you try to limit your scope to a smaller topic area. And then you define your source selection criteria. This is the search for literature. Some articles published between a specific date range, focusing on a specific geographic region, using keywords, reference list, try to include any studies contrary to your point of view. Try to read the select articles thoroughly and evaluate them. So evaluate, synthesize the studies, findings, and conclusions. Try to organize, when you read the selected articles and you evaluate them, you need to note, for example, assumptions that some or most researchers seems to make. You need to note methodologies, testing procedures, subjects, material tested researchers use, the experts in the field, some names or labs that are frequently referenced. You can remark what other things, conflicting theories or results methodologies, the popularity, the influential theories, and how these have or have not changed over time. So you search for literature. You include either studies which are contrary to your point of view. Then you read the select articles, you evaluate and synthesize the studies, findings, and conclusions, and then you try to organize the selected papers by looking for patterns and by developing subtopics. This means that you can note findings, for example, that are common or contested, important trends in research, the most influential theories. If your literature review is extensive, then you need to find a large table surface, and you need to place post-it notes and filling, for example, cards to organize all your findings into categories. If you can move them around, if you decide that they fit better under different headings, or you need to establish new topic headings, develop headings or subheadings that reflect the major themes and patterns that you detected, and develop a thesis or purpose statement. This means write 1 or 2 sentence statements summarizing the conclusion that you have reached about the major trends and developments that you see in the research that has been conducted on your subject. And then the next step is to write the paper follow the organizational structure that you developed above, including the headings, subheadings, make certain that each section links logically to the one before and after, structure your sections by themes or subtopics, not by individual theorists or researchers, and review your work, how you will review your work by looking at the topic sentence of each paragraph, making an outline of each section of the paper, decide whether you need to add more information, whether you need to delete irrelevant information, or whether you need to restructure sections. Read your work out loud. That way you will better be able to identify where you need, for example, punctuation marks to signal pauses or divisions within sentences, where you have made grammatical errors, or where your sentences are unclear. Make certain that all your citation references are correct. Check to make sure that you have not plagiarized, either by failing to cite the source of information or by using words quoted directly from the source. There should not be grammatical or spelling errors, and sentences should flow smoothly and logically. So you select your topic, you begin your search with a general keyword, you consider searching for unpublished studies. Searching for unpublished studies is very important. And then you look for your articles, identify the landmark classic studies, you write the first draft, you know the topics, it's very important, I mentioned before, and then you organize the selected papers that I mentioned before, you develop the thesis, you write one or two sentence statements which summarize the conclusion that you have reached about the major trends and developments. If you want to write a first draft, then you need to begin by identifying the broad problem area, but try to avoid global statements. And in the review, you can indicate why the topic being reviewed is important, distinguish between research findings and other sources of information, indicate why certain studies are important, and if you're commenting on the timeliness of the topic, you need to be specific in describing the time frame. So here, of course, we need to discuss other literature reviews on your topic. If you find something which is earlier published, describe the reasons for choosing not to discuss a particular topic, and avoid long lists of non-specific references in academic writing. If a landmark study was replicated, then you need to mention that, and of course indicate the results of your replication. If the results of previous studies are inconsistent, then you need to cite them separately. And you need to speculate also on the reasons, discuss the reasons for inconsistent findings in previous research review section of a thesis or dissertation. So write the paper, make certain that each section links logically to the one before and after, structure your sections by themes or subtopics, try to prioritize analysis over description, review was what I mentioned before, look at the topic sentences, make an outline of each section of the paper, check to make certain that you have covered all the important up-to-date and pertinent text, make certain that you have included all your citation references, and text, of course, should be written in clear academic style, sentences should flow smoothly. The quoted acceptable sources for literature reviews, the peer-reviewed journal articles, the written academic books, articles in professional journals, peer-reviewed journal articles, etc. And writing the fine article, again, I'm mentioning about this specific structure that you need to follow. And originality rarely means starting from scratch. Remember this. Originality means how to expand, how to build on what is already known. A good review is something which can be an invaluable tool, and that's why we need to be very careful when we draft our first literature review, our first paper, and then how we submit our final paper. You can, of course, search about Scopus Journal. Scopus is one of the largest, most reputable database nowadays, the most popular for academic literature. It covers various formats. You can find journals for free, but not only paid. So indexed publications, and there is also the publication which are updated daily. Scopus has also special tools that allow the researcher to go further. The Web of Science is another database, which is also very popular, that you can use. It contains data filters, a title, publication name, year published, author, etc. Here is we need to be careful about how to publish the paper, for example, in Scopus. We'll explain all these things in another session. As I mentioned before, there are free Scopus indexed journals. So just to summarize before concluding, to say some things that if we ask, for example, ourselves about the scope and our purpose, we need to define the boundaries and objectives of our review. What is the main problem or research question addressed? This clarifies the central issue of a literature review that we're trying to explore or solve. It sets a direction for the entire review, and it acts as a compass for selecting relevant literature. It helps avoid irrelevant or overly broad content and should be clear, focused, and researchable. What are the key concepts or variables involved? Here we need to identify core themes, terms, or constructs that define our topic. And this guide our search themes and inclusion criteria. This is important for building your search strategy. This helps in defining operational terms used across studies, clarifies relationships between dependent and independent variables. Lay out what our review intends to achieve. It's about the goals behind reviewing the literature, not the broader research goals of a thesis. So this could involve identifying trends, evaluating the evidence, revealing gaps. Objectives should be always specific, measurable, and achievable, and these often form the basis of our review questions or sub-themes. So as an example of this objective is to synthesize, for example, existing evidence on the effectiveness of online learning, or identify methodological gaps in studies on student performance during pandemics, or to evaluate the role of technology accessibility in educational outcomes. And what type of literature review is most appropriate? This helps you choose a structured approach based on your purpose, based on your scope and available literature. That could be systematic. We mentioned about systematic. If we want to answer a narrowly defined question with exhaustive evidence, on the other hand, it may be narrative. So if we have broader overviews of theoretical discourse, then we will choose narrative. Scoping is another type of review if we want to map a research area when it's still emerging. So we choose based on the depth, on the breadth and clarity of our topic. So here you can see about the main problem, the central focus of the review, why it matters, because guide search, the core themes, build search strategy, the objectives, the goals, set the direction, the review type, because this choose based on, we choose or we select based on the depth, the scope, and the rigor. What keywords and search themes are most relevant? Usually they're derived from our research question or core concepts using synonyms or related terms and acronyms. This improves coverage. So think about disciplinary language differences. If your topic is mental health, for example, in adolescent using social media, then the keywords would include what? Would include mental health, adolescents, teenagers, social media, Instagram, psychological well-being, things like that. Which databases or sources are best suited? I can give you some examples. Different topics, of course, require different databases. PubMed for health medicine, for education, another one, PsycInfo for psychology, Scopus for the disciplinary reviews. So using the wrong database may result in irrelevant or superficial sources. I mentioned before about the grey literature, to define whether important insights exist outside of peer-reviewed journals, especially in emerging or under research fields. Then we can use grey literature. We can consult grey literature, which includes NGO reports, white papers, conference proceedings. And how can Boolean operators of Peters improve search accuracy? To refine the search logic, we can help balance the comprehension and precision by using these Boolean operators, or there are filters that can help limit the hearings, for example, the language peer-reviewed, etc. So we discuss also about this, the inclusion-exclusion criteria. Think about what time period should the review cover. To define the chronological scope of our review, we need to ensure that our sources are current and historically relevant, depending on our topic. Choose a time frame that aligns with recent developments in the field. The historical emergence of the phenomenon helps limit outdated search or ensures that we cover trends over time. It's important for fast evolving fields like technology, like medicine, like policy. To decide also whether to include only studies that have undergone academic peer review, which ensures credibility, scholarly rigor, is another question. Peer-reviewed studies tend to be, of course, more reliable, more methodologically sound, accepted by the academic community. However, as I said before, excluding grey literature may result in publication bias, especially in new or practice-based areas. So your decision, this depends on your review type. Systematic reviews often require peer-reviewed sources and the maturity of the field. Emerging fields might rely more on reports, on theses, etc. For a health policy review, including grey literature like government reports might be as important as in peer-reviewed studies. Are certain geographical regions or populations the focus in order to ensure that your literature is content-specific and relevant to the target population or setting? Remember that your literature should align with the demographic, cultural, or geographical context of the research question. This helps ensure that the findings are generalizable or applicable to your area of interest, and of course avoids misleading conclusions from studies done in vastly different settings. In order to define the methodological scope of our review, we need to help ensure comparability, and relevance of results. What type of study designs is mentioned before. What I said before is about quantitative, qualitative, or mixed, helps filter out studies that cannot contribute meaningfully to our synthesis. So questions like this about organization, what tools you can use for managing citations. The three popular are Mendeley, Zotero, and EndNote. These are the three popular, the most popular. So reference management saves time, of course, especially during text citation, bibliography formatting. You can use these amazing tools. You can track with how will you track which sources have been reviewed or excluded. Of course, in order to develop a systematic tracking method for handling large number of sources during screening and review, this is very important because you avoid duplicate work. This ensures transparency and reproducibility. So methods may include reference managers with note-taking with status tags, which include Prisma flow diagram to track identification or screening, eligibility, inclusion, or spreadsheets with custom columns, etc. And decide which method will you use to organize key themes and findings. Methods include literature matrix or summary tables, thematic coding, which means assign themes or keywords to findings, or mind maps or concept maps to visualize relationships between themes, and critical appraisal, quality assessment of the study is methodologically sound and free from bias. So check for clear research questions, for appropriate sampling and sample size, for valid reliable data collection tools, for proper data analysis techniques. This includes at the same time how we assess the different types of bias: selection bias, publication bias, confirmation bias. And check how credible and authoritative our paper in order to assess the expertise, affiliation, objectivity of the authors, which can affect the reliability of the work. Then we need to search for indicators of credibility, like institutional affiliation, previous publications, funding transparency, to check if the findings are generalizable, context-specific, and generalizability depends on sample size and diversity, depends on cultural, geographical, demographical variables on the study design. And this helps us understand the scope and limits of each study's implication for our research. And how is evidence strength assessed? Using common frameworks like GRADE. This rates the quality of evidence in systematic reviews, especially in healthcare, or CASPO, with another framework which provides checklists for qualitative and quantitative studies, or other tools. These tools guide you actually in assessing the validity, the relevance, the consistency, the applicability of results. And then for synthesis and analysis, you identify common threads or concepts that appear repeatedly, helping you build a cohesive narrative or conceptual framework. So this involves coding and categorizing findings from various resources. Themes may relate to key issues, factors influencing outcomes, methodological trends, conceptual debates, which is useful for both qualitative and mixed method literature reviews. How the different studies compare or contrast in their findings in order to assess the consistency or divergence in results. This is important because this reveals the areas of agreement or consensus, the contradictions or tensions, or possible reasons for differences. And this encourages a critical synthesis rather than a single summary of individual studies. Very important, identify which theoretical framework or model are commonly used. And this shows the intellectual foundations that you use in your field. It's about constructivism, it's about health building model, it's about the theory of planned behavior in psychology. Are there any conflicting findings? How can they explain? Conflicts may arise from different sample demographics, from cultural contextual factors, from variations in methodology. So you need to identify contradictions. This helps uncover the opportunities for future research or gaps in literature or the complexity of the phenomenon. And the gaps identify areas of neglect or imbalance in the literature in terms of content, or demographics. This has to do with how the topics are searched, how to spotlight marginalized or overlooked populations, or controversial topics, or spotlight imbalances in regional cultural focus, to highlight areas of debate of conflicting findings, what recommendations or you can make for future research. Very important. We need to suggest expanding sample sizes to amplify different methodologies, to explore related but untested variables. And these recommendations are valuable because they are based on first-hand limitations of prior work. And finally, to explicitly show how your work will contribute to the field, you need to make it original, necessary, and well justified. So a strong review should end by synthesizing the identified gaps, positioning your research as a logical next step, and articulate your unique contribution. This strengthens your research proposal or thesis defense by aligning your goals with real needs in the literature. Finally, when writing a presentation, make sure that to define the optimal way to organize your literature review, whether you use chronological or thematic chronological structure, what citation you will use, which of the common style that you will use, how you will, what the visual aids are important, the flow diagrams, the summary tables, the thematic maps. So plan and scope. Before diving into database, define the scope of your review, formulate questions, use frameworks like PICO, very popular, the Population Intervention Comparison Outcome framework, or SPIDER, Sample Phenomenon of Interest, Design Evaluation Research Style for Qualitative Research. For example, research literature, use a major databases, the citation tracking, the literature mentioned before, organizing, managing sources, effective management avoids duplication, and the critical appraisal, evaluate the quality, reliability of studies. Here we can use techniques like ASPE checklist for different study types, SAMSTAR, thematic reviews, grade system, analyze the sample size of the bias, validity, reliability, and the synthesis in writing, the techniques, usual techniques about theoretical synthesis, thematic synthesis, etc. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Dr. Esther, of course, for any question we can discuss here. I think it was exhaustive. I think it was exhaustive.
Very a lot. Really, you covered a lot of the subtopics under this literature review techniques. Yeah, I'm very sure all of our audience have benefited from this session, as it is really detailed, very detailed. So, if there's any glossary or any words which you find is difficult, definitely you can dive in and search. Okay, we have there's many ways to search and learn from there. Before then you can continue this session again and you will understand better. Of course, those who are doing their PhD, they will easier for them to understand. But if you are not, or you're somebody new, of course you have to face challenges, but nothing comes easy. Definitely we all can do better with all this guidance and offered by Professor Dr. Rania Lampu for us. So we thank Dr. Rania for these generous contributions to global audience for our learning. Thank you so much, Dr. Rania. So we will meet Dr. Rania in another new topic next week. Okay, I keep it suspense. Look out for our posting on my timelines. Okay, so you will know what is the next topic next Thursday at 6 p.m. IST. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Rania. Thank you for the wonderful session. Thank you for the good sharing. Thank you so much. Bye. Happy weekend.
Bye. Bye.